I'm of the opinion that you can blame the MCU for a lot of things that contributed to the downfall of modern entertainment. But the real question is, did the MCU and comic book movies in general kill comedy? Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
I was just talking to someone not that long ago about how it seems like Hollywood doesn't produce comedies anymore. And to me, there are a multitude of reasons for that. But comedian and actor Adam Devine put forth recently his theory about why he thinks this is happening. And right when he did, fanboys everywhere collectively lost their minds.
You're pathetically predictable.
In all fairness, the MCU does seem like an easy target these days, because the quality of the product has dipped tremendously, there's no doubt about that. But even when the MCU was at its peak, and most people were satisfied, you could make the case that these movies impacted the way audiences looked at all movies. Audiences became brainwashed into thinking that the MCU way of doing things was the only way to do things. And what happened was rival studios saw that and tried to replicate that success in the most lazy way possible. But what we got were many MCU-inspired movies and shared universes that mostly produced subpar results.
Oh, there's a big surprise!
The MCU, to its credit, worked because when it was conceived, it very much felt fresh and exciting to audiences. No one had ever seen something like that attempted on such a large scale. But ironically, what was once looked at as revolutionary in the entertainment world ended up actually kind of harming film in the long run, as a lot of films post-MCU exhibited a real lack of creativity and inspiration overall. Even within the MCU, the movies got more and more watered down over the years. And this was all because Marvel Studios developed a formula that worked and proceeded to apply that formula to every single thing that they produced.
Put some effort into it!
To me, the blueprint for this formula consisted of a combination of elements that mostly included borrowing aspects of Iron Man 1, which is still their best movie to date, by the way. And post-Avengers, they continue to use the Joss Whedon-inspired quirky dialogue and cringe comedy that the franchise has now become known for. I challenge anyone to find me an MCU movie that doesn't use comedy to awkwardly relieve tension within the film. The instances of where this doesn't happen is few and far between. And it's not even good comedy, it's that low-hanging fruit comedy that is only really funny to 30 or 40-year-olds who have the mentality of a 13-year-old. Jokes about superhero names, jokes about superheroes doing everyday things instead of beating up bad guys.
Had you ever heard of the healing power of laughter?
Now, if the argument was that the MCU killed comedy because of how bad the comedy is contained within those films, then I would kind of understand that. But Adam Devine seems to be looking at this from a slightly different perspective. While talking about the fall of movie comedy on a podcast recently, he said, quote, "Marvel ruined it. Superhero movies ruined comedies. You go to the theater and you expect to watch something that costs $200 million to make. And comedy movies aren't that. And they still make those movies kind of funny, like, oh my god, is that raccoon talking? This is hilarious. Which it is, but it's not real comedy." I think what he's trying to say here is that superhero movies now occupy the section of the market that used to be occupied by comedies. And that audiences are content laughing at talking raccoons, and that there's no real room for real comedy. Now, in reality, there is room for both, and it doesn't have to be one or the other.
That makes sense.
And this may shock some of you, but I would place more blame at the feet of studios and the audiences themselves than I would the content contained within the Marvel films. Audiences have to make a commitment to comedies that aren't superhero films and support them. And studios have to be willing to make those comedies, and they also have to make them well enough to where audiences want to support them. It's kind of a mutually beneficial relationship that has always existed.
Because it's all part of the plan.
He followed this up by saying, quote, "Every studio used to put out several comedies a year. Now last year, there were like 6 or 7 total." But the question is, why aren't studios releasing more comedies? Is it that audiences aren't supporting them? Maybe. Truthfully, most traditional comedies don't cost all that much to make, so I can't imagine that they would need to make a lot in order to make a profit.
I'd buy that for $1.
So I don't know if I buy into it being a financial burden. You just have to make sure the comedy movies you are making are worthwhile. Honestly, the real reason that I personally believe comedy movies aren't being made as much anymore has nothing to do with box office, has nothing to do with audience interaction, and it has nothing to do with superhero movies. I think it has everything to do with how hard it is to produce comedy within this highly political correct climate we find ourselves in. Comedy, at least the best kind of comedy, should not have restrictions. It should push the envelope and encourage people to laugh at themselves as well as others. And when was the last time we watched a comedy movie do that? The last time I can remember it happening was 2013's This Is the End, an appropriately named film that with each passing day feels more and more like the end of traditional comedy films. There are things done and said in that movie that people would lose their minds over if it happened today. And the whole point of that movie is for these famous friends to poke fun at each other, and that's something that is desperately missing from the genre.
James Franco didn't suck any last night. Now I know y'all are tripping.
If you notice, many comedians have come out over the past few years and spoke about their lack of desire to try to entertain these highly sensitive audiences. And I think what's going on is that there is no desire to make comedy movies coming from the people who are actually funny. And some people who used to be funny spend more time on social media being annoying than they do actually perfecting their craft. I come from an era when comics like Eddie Murphy would literally say anything to get a laugh out of people, and rarely in that time did anyone react in an uptight way about it. If Eddie Murphy was saying these things today that he was saying back then, he would probably be canceled, tar and feathered, and kicked out of the country abruptly.
Ha ha, very funny, motherfucker.
All for trying to make people laugh, as ridiculous as that sounds. Even the things that are supposed to bring you joy in 2023 are overanalyzed and ridiculed to the point that it sucks all of the fun out of them. Why would anyone want to make a comedy in this climate? A climate where people are regressing mentally and going back in time to try to find things to be upset about?
S-O-F capital T. Soft. Huh?
While I agree that superhero movies, unfortunately, take up a lot of screen time and promotion away from smaller films, we can't place all the blame there. We really need someone to have enough balls to write and produce a comedy that isn't afraid to push the envelope once again. That's how we bring comedy back, by taking action, not by trying to blame other movie trends for stepping on your toes. And just like anything else that feels like it's run its course, sometimes taking things back to basics is the best approach. I believe that comedies have always worked and will work again, as long as we don't let the insecurities of society stop us from having a good time.
Y'all be cool. Right on.